Alright, I hope this goes here. I've never posted before, but it seems like it fits here, and honestly a friend suggested it a while ago. So for a bit of context, you need to know this company was pretty corrupt, and they ended up getting away with some shady crap for quite a while before this. It's also worth noting that, before working for them, I was training at a martial arts club, and loved doing so despite how tough the training could be. I had every intention of hopefully going pro one day. This is ultimately what fueled my anger. This happened a few years ago. I'd been working for this company for a couple months, and was finally starting to adjust enough to possibly go back to martial arts training, even after working a 12/8 shift. I came in on my scheduled Saturday shift. My normal shift supervisor was away with his wife, who had just given birth. The supervisor who was there usually worked a different shift, but was filling in. They assigned me to my usual job, which I later found out from my physiotherapist nobody should be doing for 12 straight, especially if they are my size. I'm not a big guy, maybe 140 pounds drenched. Normally the job wouldn't have caused me any issues. However, that day I was stuck doing the same job with different material, which was well over the safe legal lifting weight for a single person. Around 3 hours into my shift, I'd started to experience pain in my back and one of my shoulders. I spoke to the supervisor asking to be moved because of it. They replied, "Sure, I'll see what we have available." They didn't bother looking. I'd like to state that this was a factory job. Something is always available, especially since we constantly found ourselves understaffed. Of course, with the job being my first official job as an adult, I wanted to make a good lasting impression, just as a pillow in case I needed it later in life. Over the course of my shift I complained twice more, and even talked to my coworker that was right across the truckway from me about it. Eventually she started assisting me with lifting my now normally used material, seeing as I wasn't able to do it steadily alone anymore. The pain I was in was intense. At the end of my shift, I went home and relaxed before it really hit me hard. I have a high pain tolerance, to the point where I barely notice broken bones. This pain put me in tears and made it extremely difficult to move. I called into work explaining the situation and informing them I wouldn't be in for work the next day, and if the pain didn't start to diminish I'd be in the hospital instead. I took some over-the-counter muscle relaxers and mild pain medication before going to bed. I had never slept so badly in my life, consistently waking up in pain and barely being able to move. I ended up being awake when my mum went to work. She worked at the same place. A family friend came over to check on me, and we went to the hospital. I wasn't even able to lift my right arm up, so it was straight out at shoulder high with my other arm. It was just more pain than I could take, while keeping enough strength to just barely stay on my feet. The doctor said it was an overuse injury and that I'd be fine in 2 weeks. They wrote a note stating that I was on modified duties for that time period before I'd be fine to go back to my usual job. I took it with a grain of salt, since I was in more pain than I'd ever experienced before in my life, but hoped he was correct. It's worth noting that they didn't splint my arm or give me any sort of medication which possibly caused more work later on. I spent the next 2 days trying to rest as much as possible, still in a stupid amount of pain. Wednesday rolled around and I went in for work. My normal shift supervisor was happy to see I was alright and apparently had gone off on the other supervisor for letting something like this happen to one of his employees. I was assigned modified duties as the doctor instructed and went to work. After being shown what I was doing, around an hour into my shift the pain in my shoulder got much worse. My arm started to go purple and I felt pins and needles. Constant pain in my joints from my shoulder all the way into my finger knuckles. There was sweeping pain and sharp stabbing pain as well. It got so bad that I started to feel nauseated and my vision was fading in and out. My coworker noticed this and asked if I was alright. I replied no and asked her to get the supervisor for me. I told the supervisor I needed to go back to the hospital and they said I'd have to fill out the incident report sheet. I asked if they'd get it for me and they said they would be back with it ASAP. At this point it was around 8 AM. I didn't see the supervisor again until 10 AM, and they most certainly did not have the papers I needed to fill out, so I asked again. At this point I was barely holding my composure, and again was told they'd get it for me ASAP. My coworker had started to get very worried about me and said that they honestly wouldn't have stayed half as long as I had at that point, but I like to do things properly and wanted to resolve things as quickly as I could then leave. Over the course of the next hour I asked multiple times to get this paperwork so I could leave for medical treatment. At 12:30 I'd had enough. I was livid and didn't give a crap about my language filter anymore. I spoke to my coworker and told her I was going to the hospital the second my family friend arrived to pick me up, and then pulled out my phone to call them right there. She looked at me and said, "Alright, I'll tell the supervisor after you leave, because this is effing bullcrap." She was pissed that I had to sit through this crap, especially for hours. My ride arrived, and I went straight to the hospital. The health leave a lot to be desired here. I sat there for not another 5 hours before finally being pulled into a room, where I sat for another hour. My mother made it to the hospital before I was even looked at. The doctor finally came in. I'd been in the hospital for over 6 hours at this time. They had me do exactly the same thing as the original doctor did and told me it was simply an overuse injury. I was effing done. Looking back, I don't know how I managed to not flip my crap at this guy, but I told him to run some sort of test because this was bullcrap and clearly getting worse. The doctor reluctantly agreed to do an ultrasound on my shoulder, and 10 minutes later wheeling in the machine. Almost the second the screen lit up, after placing the ultrasound on my shoulder, he said, "I'm ordering WSIB, Workplace Safety Insurance Board, to provide 8 weeks of physiotherapy. The maximum amount of time they can order for WSIB to cover here." I found out from my physiotherapist that I had severe nerve damage, a partial tear in my rotator cuff, and knots in my back preventing blood flow to my shoulder. This crushed me because it means that not only was it possible I'd never be able to do what I dreamt of doing in life, but if I could it may become aggravated later on, possibly resulting in a worse injury. I asked if I'd be able to go back to MMA after therapy, and my therapist told me he didn't know for sure, but depending on how well I recovered it was still a possibility. Fast forward about a month, I found something out about the supervisors mentioned so far. They both actually tried to comply with my requests, but the owner micromanaged things in a way that made them unable to do it. Until this point I had considered possibly suing the first supervisor because they didn't comply with my rights as a worker, and I was injured as a result. This piece of crap owner had these two under his thumb. He'd been known to fire people for no reason and would make something up to cover his tracks. I started to take some mental notes about things that were not safe in that place. That is just about everything. The major ones were obvious though. They had dangerous chemicals all over, and I mean these chemicals were all over the place, and the chemical room was 1 not properly isolated, 2 not stored properly, and 3 not even ventilated. Furthermore, they had a refine deaf guy driving the forklift. I didn't use this because the guy was a great person and I didn't want to F him over, but at the time I made a mental note about it and considered. A couple days later, I had another physiotherapy appointment and had to go into work because that had a labor board return to work specialist come in to assess what my modified duties happened to be and what my original had been. We first started with my original job. The FI owner put a different far lighter material there and hid the FI normal material, which was several times heavier. I specifically stated that the material wasn't what I'd normally worked with, and even stated the damn serial number on the material that told you where it was stored. We looked in that location and sure enough, it was empty. Effing empty. I sighed, slightly defeated, and we moved on to the modified duties I was doing. The owner stated that I was doing said job, legit counting parts, and each bag only had 500 pieces in it. I knew for a fact that was bullcrap and called him out on it in front of the man. He grabbed one of the bags already sorted and put it on the scale, thinking he'd be able to put a fast one on me. Sure enough, it read 500 pieces. I look at the specialist and told him the bag was already sorted. I then grabbed one that wasn't and placed it on the scale. There was something like 1200 pieces in it. The owner was clearly not happy about it, and the specialist kind of had a slight grin on his face. I know for a fact that the bags normally had around 14 to 1700 pieces in them. The owner got extremely lucky that it was one of the few bag which didn't, because it was just under the limit for the amount of weight I was allowed to lift on my modified duties. After that we were done there, and on the way out I was walking with the specialist. Since my ride was already there, I said it was too bad the material I usually worked with wasn't in stock. I stated it was usually packed to the brim. He replied it was a bit odd, but he was only there that day. I think he knew things were a bit fishy there. He couldn't do anything without evidence though. He gave me his business card and told me to call him if anything happened or I had any questions. At this point I was pretty furious that the owner had clearly pulled some shady crap and from my perspective attempted to blatantly discredit me. I was honestly done with the place and didn't want to work there. However, I decided to give the benefit of the doubt and wasn't completely hell-bent on destroying them yet. I'm a bit too patient, and honestly I figured things might work out for the better, but I still kept making mental notes. Oh, that doesn't have a safety. That saw doesn't have the proper gloves. ECT. Then my physiotherapy ended. These effing scumbags, on my next shift right effing after physiotherapy ended, decided to put me on the job that injured me. The pre-shift room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop in the parking lot. I said alright, but if I experience any pain or discomfort I expect you to move me. I went to work. Again the pain started, and I went to my supervisor demanding to be moved. I did this 3 times. They were livid, they couldn't fire me. Ultimately they said, and I quote, "If you can't handle this job then perhaps it's not the right fit for you. Everyone else here is able to do it." The supervisor most likely was doing what he was told to, because again, if you butt heads with the owner he doesn't take to it well. So I asked him if I had to fill out any forms regarding it. Sure hell I got the forms in less than 2 effing minutes. Signed and left, but I was far from done. I could have let crap slide, but they effing put me on the same effing job that injured me. I was sure as hell not fully recovered, and I wasn't about to possibly destroy any chance I had of recovering enough to do what I wanted in life, even if it wasn't close to assured. Now, me and my mother made an anonymous call to the regional fire marshal providing some information that piqued their interest and informing them that the owner liked to hide things during inspections. We also made a call to my father, who was away on business. My father, who was in the military for well over 2 decades, made some calls to friends in high places, and they pulled every military contract the company had. The fire marshal showed up for a surprise fire inspection and noticed very alarming things. He issued a boatload of fines to both the branch and the main company. The fines were in the 7 digits range and had 2 weeks to be paid. The owner had to pay the branch fine himself. They also ordered the branch to shut down until the issues were fixed. I found out 2 months after this that they now have over 30 labor board investigations going on, and their truck for delivery doesn't go out even half as much as it used to. Nobody lost their job over this, but several people I knew who worked there moved on to better jobs. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, a like and a comment would mean a lot in YouTube's world. Share with us if you would have done things differently, and don't forget to support the original authors with an upvote. Links are in the description. Peace out, and catch you tomorrow.